What would you do if the man everyone believed to be dead suddenly appeared in front of you on the same day you ran away from your own wedding? Katherine Morales ran through the mountain forest with her torn wedding dress catching on roots and branches as if the earth itself wanted to hold her back. Her breath was short and painful as she climbed higher into the mountains. The white silk dress that once sparkled in the church now looked nothing more than a rag. Behind her, angry voices echoed through the trees. The men her father sent were not far behind. Katherine pressed her back against a tall pine tree, fighting to stay quiet. She could hear her name being shouted by men on horseback. They were not calling with worry or love. Their voices sounded cold, angry, and full of control. She was supposed to marry Marcus Whitmore that day, a man 30 years older than her, chosen by her father for business reasons. Katherine wanted freedom, not a prison dressed as marriage. Her fingers shook as she lifted her dress and continued running, her satin shoes slipping against rocks. The ground was rough, and her feet quickly began to bleed through the thin fabric. The mountain air grew colder, but fear pushed her forward. She had already made her choice in that church. She would not stand beside a man she feared. She had run, leaving gasps, whispers, and chaos behind. At last, she reached a rushing stream. Katherine fell to her knees and cupped cold water in her hands to drink. Her heart wouldn't stop racing. She had grown up near these mountains and knew a few paths from childhood adventures. But she also knew the deeper she went, the closer she came to the land of the man everyone in town feared, the mountain man. People claimed he lived alone, far from civilization. Some said he was violent. Others whispered he had killed men with his bare hands. Yet even the scary stories about him felt safer than the life she was running from. Her father had not listened to her begging. He saw her marriage as a business deal, not a daughter's future. Marcus Whitmore had already shown her what kind of husband he would be. He had grabbed her wrist the night before the wedding and whispered threats with a smile. The purple mark still stung beneath her sleeve. The moment the preacher asked if anyone objected, Katherine found courage she didn't know she had. She refused to marry. Marcus exploded in anger. Her father turned red with shame and rage. Before anyone could stop her, she ran out of the church and climbed into a carriage, forcing the driver to take her toward the mountains. Now, miles away, cold, hungry, and exhausted, she climbed uphill. The forest thickened, shadows stretching as the afternoon sun sank behind the mountains. Her dress tore again. She finally grabbed a sharp rock and cut the long skirt until it reached her knees. The sound of ripping cloth felt like freedom. By the time she reached a clearing, the sun had dropped low. Snowy wind brushed her skin and made her shiver. At the center of the clearing, across a wide creek, stood a small cabin, smoke rising from its chimney. Someone lived here. Katherine froze. If this was the mountain man's home, should she approach? He could be dangerous. His reputation was frightening. But her knees shook from weakness. Her arms had scratches. Her feet were bleeding. She needed help. And if the men chasing her found her out here in the open, she would never be free again. As she hesitated, a tall man stepped out from the cabin's shadow. He was strong and broad-shouldered, wearing buckskin and wool, with dark hair that fell near his shoulders. His eyes were calm but sharp, like he saw everything at once. When he spotted her, he didn't rush forward or shout. He simply watched her quietly, as if waiting for her to decide if she was a threat or someone in need. "You're hurt," he said in a deep, steady voice. Katherine swallowed hard. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "I need help." He walked closer, carefully, not wanting to scare her. But as he stepped into the fading light, she saw his face more clearly. Something inside her jolted. His face, his eyes, there was something familiar. He looked at her with an expression she didn't understand. "Katherine," he said softly, "you don't remember me, do you?" Quote. Her heart stopped. He knew her name. "How do you know who I am?" she asked. Fear growing again, she hadn't told him anything. He took one gentle step closer. "My name is George Miller. We knew each other once, a long time ago." Her knees weakened. The name hit her like a memory she had buried in childhood. "George Miller," she whispered. "But you died. Your family. There was a fire." "I survived," he said quietly. "I've lived here ever since." Before she could speak, they both heard voices echoing from the distance. Her pursuers were still coming, closer. George looked toward the sound, then back at her with a calm seriousness that made her believe he could protect her from anything. "You've been running long enough," he said. "Come inside. You're safe now." But she didn't feel safe at all, not yet. Because one question burned in her heart. If George Miller had truly died years ago, how was he standing here alive? Katherine stepped inside the cabin, unsure if she had just found safety or walked into a new danger. The warmth of the fireplace wrapped around her, easing the shivers that had taken over her body. The cabin was small, but felt lived in. A wooden table, a bed of furs, shelves lined with jars of herbs, and tools hung neatly on the walls. It wasn't the home of a wild animal like people claimed. It looked like a place built with care. George moved quietly, lighting a lamp. "Sit by the fire," he said. "You're freezing." Still stunned, she lowered herself into a chair. He knelt and gently removed what was left of her shoes. When he saw the cuts on her feet, his jaw tightened with anger, not at her, but for what she had gone through. He cleaned her wounds with warm water and placed a soft cloth beneath her heels. "You shouldn't be out here alone in that dress," he said. Katherine stared at him, trying to understand what was happening. "Everyone thought you died in that fire. I went to sleep crying for you." The whole town mourned. George paused, his hands still for a moment. "I know, I watched the funeral from a distance. I wanted to run to you, but I was just a boy. Scared. I didn't know who started the fire, and I didn't trust anyone." His voice carried years of pain. "But why stay hidden all this time?" she whispered. He looked into the fire. "Because the world I left behind only brought pain. Up here, I learned to live again." Then he turned to her. "But I never forgot you." The words hit her heart hard. She remembered a boy with gentle eyes who promised they would always protect each other. They had been children, but their bond had felt real, strong, and safe. They used to meet under the oak tree behind her home. She had whispered secrets to him she never told anyone else. He reached into a small wooden box and pulled out a simple ring made of twisted wire with a tiny stone. It reflected the firelight like a captured star. "I made this after the fire," he said, "for you. I carried it all these years, believing that one day fate would lead you back to me." Katherine stared at the ring, her heart thumping like thunder. "George, that was a childhood promise." "It was real to me," he said. "You said we would marry when we were grown and live somewhere no one could hurt us. I waited for the day you would need me." His eyes softened. "And here you are." Before she could find words, a voice shouted from outside, "Katherine, come out now! Your foolish running ends tonight!" Her father. George stood instantly, his expression changing. The gentle warmth vanished and was replaced with a look strong and protective. He moved to the window and peeked out. "They're here," he said calmly. 8 men. Katherine's chest tightened. "You can't face them alone. They'll kill you." "I should just go out there." George turned and stepped toward her, his voice firm. "No, they came with guns and chains, not love or reason. If you walk out, you walk into a cage." A heavy knock shook the cabin door. "Katherine Morales!" Marcus Whitmore's voice was filled with anger. "You belong to me! You will come out or we'll drag you out." George didn't open the door. Instead, he spoke through it, his voice deep and clear. "She does not belong to you. She chooses her own life. You have no right to force her." "By law, she is mine," Marcus yelled. George looked at Katherine, and his next words stunned her. "She was mine long before your contract existed." Katherine's breath caught. He wasn't angry. He said it like a truth carved into stone. The men outside murmured in frustration. The situation was turning dangerous. George checked his rifle and placed a second one near her. "If anything happens, you stay behind the fireplace. Do not move. I promised I would protect you, and I keep my promises." Gunshots suddenly blasted through the windows. Glass shattered. Katherine screamed as George shielded her with his body, pulling her to the ground. More bullets tore through the wood. The cabin shook with violence. George moved like a man who had survived battles before. He fired only when needed, with aim so steady it was clear he wasn't a stranger to danger. The attackers yelled instructions to one another outside. They planned to take her by force. Between gunfire, Katherine trembled. "George, you could have stayed hidden. You survived the world once. Why risk everything again?" He glanced at her, his eyes soft even in chaos. "Because you're worth fighting for. You always were." Her heart swelled with a feeling she hadn't expected to feel today. Hope. Outside, the men regrouped. Marcus Whitmore's voice rose again, furious and unhinged. "Burn the cabin if you have to. She is mine." Katherine's blood ran cold. Burn the cabin, with them inside. George's jaw tightened. Then they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The storm outside grew stronger. Wind howled. Snow began to fall. The mountain seemed to answer George, as if it stood with him. Katherine looked at him with fear and wonder. Who had he become, and what was he about to do? "Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know." The storm outside grew louder, wind pushing against the cabin walls, as if the mountain itself was warning the men to leave. But the voices outside only grew more angry. Snow swirled in the night, and the sound of men moving closer surrounded the cabin. George loaded another rifle and handed Katherine a lantern. "Stay low. Don't speak unless I tell you to." Katherine's heart hammered in her chest. "There are too many of them. You can't do this alone." George put his hand on her cheek for a brief moment. "I'm not alone. You're here, and I made you a promise, long before today." Before she could respond, Marcus Whitmore shouted again, "Katherine! If you don't walk out this second, we'll drag you through the dirt. You'll learn who you belong to." Katherine felt a spark of strength rise inside her. She wasn't his. She would never be his. George moved to the window and saw two men creeping forward with burning torches. If they reached the cabin, everything would go up in flames. Without hesitation, George aimed and fired. One torch dropped to the snow, the other man ran back. The others opened fire wildly. Bullets tore into the cabin walls. Katherine pressed her hands against her ears, praying for it to stop, but George remained calm, moving from one window to another, only firing when he had a clear target. He wasn't fighting to kill. He was fighting to protect. Then, a thunder-like roar echoed across the mountain. At first, Katherine thought it was just the storm, but George's eyes sharpened with focus. "Get to the back room," he said quickly. "Now." She obeyed without question. The cabin shook as the ground rumbling grew louder, like the mountain was waking up. George grabbed Katherine's hand and pulled her into the back room, away from the windows. Outside, the men shouted in confusion. The roar became deafening. The mountain answered with force. A massive rush of snow and rock came crashing down the slope. An avalanche. George had predicted the storm. He had long prepared for this. The slide swallowed the clearing where the men had been standing only moments earlier. Their gunshots turned into screams and then silence. When the roar faded, the world outside went quiet. George waited, listening, before finally opening the door. Snow covered the clearing, deep and thick. The men, their horses, and the path they came from were gone. Some might survive, but they would not be returning any time soon. Katherine stared at the blanket of snow. She didn't feel joy. She felt relief mixed with disbelief. Did the mountain save us? George shook his head. The mountain protects those who belong to it. They came with violence. The mountain gave them a warning they chose to ignore. Night turned calm again. The storm softened. Inside, the cabin felt safer, warmer, like a shield had settled around it. Katherine stood near the fire, her torn dress hanging around her knees. "George," she said softly, "everything I knew is gone." George stepped close to her. "Not gone, replaced." She looked up at him. "By what?" He reached for the small ring he had shown her earlier, the twisted wire with the tiny stone. The same ring he had made after the fire when he was just a boy holding on to hope. "By us," he said. "If you still want what we promised each other the day we made this." Her voice shook. "We were children." "But the promise was real," he said. "We chose love freely. Not forced, not traded. You said you would marry me when we were grown, and I said I would build a place where no one could hurt you." Katherine remembered that day under the oak tree. Her first innocent kiss. Her first dream of a love that wasn't trapped in rules or deals. Her heart knew the truth before her voice did. "I still want it," she whispered. George's eyes softened with relief. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was simple, warm, and perfect. She never wanted diamonds or gold. She just wanted to feel safe, to feel chosen. And she did. "With this ring," George said, his voice low and steady, "I choose you again. Not as children dreaming, but as man and woman who survived the fire and the storm. We choose each other now." Tears filled her eyes. "With this ring, I choose you too." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, not a rushed kiss, but one filled with years of longing, love, and fate finally fulfilled. The cabin seemed to breathe with them, the fire crackling like it approved. Later, wrapped in a warm blanket beside the fireplace, Katherine rested her head on George's shoulder. The storm outside was slowing, the night growing still. "What will happen when the snow melts?" she asked softly. "They may come again," George admitted. "Your father, Marcus, others who believe they can control you." Katherine intertwined her fingers with his. "I'm not running anymore. Not unless it's with you." George smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Then we'll face whatever comes, together." As dawn touched the mountains with soft pink light, George and Katherine stepped outside. The world was covered in white snow, pure and untouched. A new beginning. She wasn't a runaway bride anymore. She was a woman who chose her own life, her own love, her own future. And she chose it with a man who had loved her since before the world broke them apart. Because some promises are stronger than fire, stronger than law, and stronger than time. Their promise had survived everything. And now it was finally theirs to live.